Good evening. I'd like to open the meeting for the regular committee of the whole, July 12th, 2021 at 6 o'clock. Good evening to those who are watching the live webcast and those who will be joining us later to watch it online. In the chambers, we almost have a full complement of councillors, and so I'll mention them by name. I'm Councillor Garnett. I'll be chairing. To my far left is Councillor Rintoul, or left, sorry. To my immediate left is Councillor Wainwright. Right beside me to my immediate right is Councillor Fallett. In the middle on the right is Mayor McNeil-Smith. And far right, Councillor Duncan. And joining us by Zoom on her lonesome, Councillor O'Keefe. And there's staff in attendance as well, and thanks you to the staff that are joining via Zoom. To begin this meeting, I would like to acknowledge that we're hosting, respectfully, this meeting on the unceded and traditional territory of the Wasanich Nation. And we'll move to the approval of the agenda.
Thank you, Chair. I'd move the approval of the agenda with one amendment, and that is to alternate items 7A and 7B, the Beacon Floating Replacement Assessment before the final report.
Second.
Motion first and seconded. All those in favor? Carries unanimous. For approval of the minutes, and I'll look to Councillor Rintoul. I believe you're chair of that meeting.
Thank you. I'll move approval of the minutes.
Second.
All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. First up, next up would be presentations, and there's a recommendation there.
I'd so move that the following two presentations this evening be extended beyond the 10-minute allotted time.
Second.
All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. First up, we have the Beacon Wharf P3 proposal, floating wharf with commercial component. And we have a presentation by Mr. Mike Cronquist of Sidney Waterfront Partnership, and he's joined by Mr. Grant Rogers. And the floor is yours, and we'll look to answer questions of committee after.
Great. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Well, good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Mike Cronquist. I'm VP Business Development for Seagate Pontoons. I'm joined online by Grant Rogers, who is the principal of Seagate Pontoons. And we are here to make a presentation, as mentioned, with respect to a P3 project for the replacement of Beacon Wharf. Background, the presentation will only do parts, and thanks very much for extending the 10 minutes because this is going to go well beyond 10 minutes. It'll be quite a journey that'll take you on here. And the beginning will be the background of the end pontoon and a description. Then we'll get into the actual proposal itself. And just a little bit of heads up, as fate has it, I have a presentation virtually with Central Saanich for a rezoning presentation tonight. It starts at 7 o'clock and I'm to be on there at 6:50. So Grant will stay on, and if there's any questions, and we'll be observing dialogue post-presentation as well. So Seagate Pontoons is a CBC based company. We're part of Marker Group, and you would know us from the Sidney Waterfront Partnership. We're the owner of the Sidney Pier Hotel and Spa and the shops at Port Sidney. Tonight, we're going to make a presentation that relates to a former portion of the Hood Canal floating bridge. This bridge is the primary connection between the Olympic Peninsula and the Seattle area. So geographically, you can see there's Sidney and Victoria, Port Angeles and Seattle, and the Hood Canal floating bridge is right on Hood Canal. It's the third longest floating bridge in the world and the longest located on a saltwater body. 16,000 to 20,000 vehicles a day, including 1,900 trucks, pass over it, believe it or not. In 2010, it was replaced as a part of the East Half Replacement Project, which extended from 2003 to 2010 at a cost of $500 million. The West Half was replaced in 1981. In 2009, we took possession of the East Half, which was approximately 900 meters of floating bridge, and it was transported in 4 sections. We towed the pontoons up, and you can see it's quite a sight as it was traveling up from Hood Canal to ultimately Amick Salvage and Sales, which is on the Fraser River. At that point, we removed the superstructure, and these are some photos of us lifting the superstructure, and it was recycled. The superstructure itself was decaying and beyond at the end of its serviceable life. That's why the east half was replaced, but the pontoons themselves were and still are in terrific condition. Here is a before and after photo. You can see the bridge in operation on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, the same sections, the NOP section, after the removal of the superstructure. So why would somebody acquire almost a kilometer of used floating bridge? Well, it's valuable marine infrastructure. Originally, we proposed to create a new marina on the Sidney Waterfront. Unfortunately, we are not successful in that proposal. And we moved on to sell the sections of the bridge as marine infrastructure at various locations around the world, really. The M&M section were sold to a private company in Sitka, Alaska. It was converted into a cruise ship terminal. The TU section was sold to small craft harbors. It was actually the port in Port Alberni. It was turned into a breakwater. As you can see, it breakwater served as a breakwater for a fishing marina behind. And it also turned into a real feature of the Port Alberni waterfront. The QRS sections, we refurbished those, and they were shipped via Dockwise to Melville Island, Australia, which is north of Darwin, where they were converted into a significant industrial facility. Most recently, in 2019, we sold the OP pontoon to Sewell's Marina in Horseshoe Bay, where it now serves as a key breakwater for the marina. The last remaining pontoon is the end pontoon, and that's the topic of discussion tonight. It was the center of the bridge. It was the bridge, a portion of the bridge that was used for the draw span to open and close in. So as you can see, we sold the various sections of the pontoons around the world, and they were certainly valued as very good marine infrastructure. I think a real benefit to the town of Sidney is the due diligence reviews that were completed by sophisticated purchasers throughout these purchases. The last remaining pontoon, I said it was the end pontoon, and the pontoons were successfully implemented in a variety of applications. Here's a plan view of the end pontoon. It's 266 feet long, 102 feet wide. It has 6 underwater struts that attaches and combines two 23-foot wide by 266-foot long pontoons. So the inner bay that's created is 55 feet wide. This pontoon was actually cut from the end of the OP pontoon that was sold to Sewell's Marine, so it previously existed at this end. And you can see the underwater struts in this photo. This is a photo on the left of the NOP section prior to the removal of the superstructure. And on the right is the remaining end pontoon. You can see it's 103 feet wide, 23 feet wide on the areas of the pontoon that are above the surface, and it has a depth of 23 feet. Again, it's 55 feet wide between the two surface pontoons. We are proposing to add a deck to a portion of the end pontoon for the purposes of the Beacon Wharf replacement project. What are the benefits of a floating concrete pontoons? Well, they rise and fall with the tide, and as a result of that, they preserve views. They've been installed now without reference for rising sea level, and they act as substantial breakwaters, which benefit seasonal moorage. Here's a photo of the Hood Canal Floating Bridge when it was in operation. This is actually a section that you can see in the foreground is one of the sections that we're discussing tonight. There's a big wind wave storm, as you can see on the left-hand side. As you can see on the right, it is quite calm. So they do really act as great wave attenuators. So now moving on to the actual P3 proposal. The P3 proposal is part of a continuum, and I'll work through a pictorial review of the continuum that is in and around the Sidney Pier Hotel and Spa on the Seaport Beacon Waterfront. So again, we are the partners of Sidney Waterfront Partnership is related to CK Pontoons, and through Sidney Waterfront Partnership, we developed the Sidney Pier Hotel and Spa. The Shaw Ocean Discovery Center, as you know, is an integral part of the Sidney Pier Hotel and Spa. Revitalized and expanded Beacon Wharf. Created an extension of the waterfront walkway. We, through a lease arrangement, renovated the Landmark building where our offices exist today. Completed significant renovation and renewal of the shops at Port Sidney. Grant Rogers was instrumental in instigating the Sidney Seaside Sculpture Walk. And adjacent to the Sidney Pier Hotel and Spa is the Seaport West redevelopment. So the last remaining opportunity on the waterfront and the last piece to completing the waterfront revitalization is Beacon Wharf replacement. Here's some photographs of Sidney Waterfront prior to the redevelopment of the pier building. We purchased the area that's indicated with the gravel parking lot. It was 1 acre. You can see it was a little bit like a moonscape, gravel parking lot, plywood fence, a smaller beacon park that had a bandstand at the former Marine Mammal Museum. Here's some shots from the ground. Marine Mammal Museum again, the bandstand, the gravel parking lot. It's the old Scratch Patch Mineral World. Had a lovely plywood fence that was placed to border our property, and an unfinished gravel walkway. And at the time, we actually owned the walkway down to the waterfront. Through the development of the Sidney Pier Hotel, we expanded and improved upon the green space. So on the left-hand side, you can see the original Beacon Park, and on the right-hand side, you can see the expansion that took place as a result of the Sidney Pier Hotel and Spa. Now the waterfront is a vibrant, really wonderful area and a big feature of Sidney, as we all know. And the hotel has become an anchor of the downtown waterfront. We call it Sidney's living room. It's a community gathering space. The former Marine Mammal Museum was removed, and actually a portion of the Marine Mammal Museum was the Customs building. We moved that up to the west end of Beacon Avenue, and that is now the tourist information area. Again, the Shaw Ocean Discovery became an integral part of the building, which is now a world-class educational attraction. This is a before picture of the Landmark building prior to the renovation that we completed on it. And here's an after. Again, shops at Port Sidney, and one of the wonderful businesses that we brought to the waterfront through another partnership through Marker Group is Victoria Distillers. This is a before of the Seaport West location, was formerly a surface parking lot, and we converted that into a nice commercial, retail, and residential development. So again, the remaining opportunity is Beacon Wharf. We presented the P3 proposal in the form of a draft MOU, and that allowed us to provide detail of the ownership and the proposed structure and the deal that would be struck in and around the partnership. So again, Seagate is the owner of the end floating concrete pontoon. Sidney Waterfront Partnership owns 100% of Seagate. SWP, we refer to Sidney Waterfront Partnership as SWP. It owns 100% of the Sidney Pier Hotel and Spa. And Market Developments Limited is a 50% partner in SWP. Market owns surplus parking stalls located under the pier building, and they are separate from any parking and loading bylaw requirements related to the hotel or any other businesses. SWP has a beneficial ownership of the shops, is the beneficial owner of the shops at Port Sidney. That is owned on the ground lease with the town of Sidney. The initial term ends in 2038. There are 2 additional renewal terms. If renewed, that lease would expire at 2054. Port Sidney Marina, actually a portion of Port Sidney Marina is actually part of the ground lease, which is an important fact and feature that we'll refer to later on in the presentation. So the purposes of the presentation will refer to Seagate, SWP, and Marker, collectively as SWP Group. Our objective through the P3 is to redevelop Beacon Wharf in a P3 project to maximize the total combined amenity and economic value of the property. We want to make Beacon Wharf a great place and public space. This proposal takes inspiration from other exceptional waterfront locations, and we look to Book Street Pier in Tasmania, Australia. So Book Street Pier is a floating pontoon building in the waterfront area of Hobart, Tasmania. It's constructed in 2014, 2015 at a cost of Australian dollars 13 million and was Australia's largest floating building upon completion. It's primarily a ferry terminal, and the architect has described it as a tourism transportation hub. So this is a bit of a disclaimer. We're going to walk through some images and plans, and obviously these are just for informational purposes only. So this is a plan view of the proposed project. You can see it's overlaid over an air photo of Beacon Park and the current Beacon Wharf. It's a perspective view of the pontoon as proposed. It's 266 feet long, 103 feet wide. There's a landing area that's 50 feet by 55 feet, and it's a raised platform that's 5 feet high from the pontoon itself. And the idea is this will provide some separation from the lower areas that allow for wave protection during some of the extreme weather events that we may get in the area. The Beacon Wharf building is 91 feet by 55 feet. It's 2 levels. Top level, 8-room hotel, which will become a part of the Sidney Pier Hotel and Spa operation. The second level, 120-seat restaurant, 600 square feet of commercial space, and 400 feet of town of Sidney space. The 120-seat restaurant will be leased to a restaurant operator. Seasonal moorage in the protected area, that's 55 feet by 95 feet, and seasonal moorage alongside at 266 feet. There are pedestrian ramps that go from the upper landing area down to the lower pontoon areas, and these lower pontoon areas will be public space. There'll be 2 of them that are 266 feet long and 23 feet wide. With the help of your great engineering department and Gen staff, they put together some really great massing and corridor view studies. So this is a look at the proposal from Glass Beach, and this is an overlay over current Beacon Wharf. So you can see as this is the highest tide scenario, and the buildings are roughly the same height. This is the viewpoint from looking down the Beacon Avenue roundabout. Again, overlaid over the current fish market and wharf area. You can see that the view corridor impact is minimized because of the distance from shore that the new project will be located. This is a viewpoint from Beacon Park. Again, with the overlay, and you can see that the views to the southeast are actually, there's less of an impact as a result of our proposed project. As with any new commercial and real estate or a building, there's parking requirements. There would be 24 additional stalls. 600 square feet of commercial will be 2 additional stalls. 8 hotel rooms, 6 additional stalls. The source of the parking stalls will be 26 stalls that are currently part of the pay parking at the shops. These are surplus stalls that we own under the lease arrangement with the town, and they're not required in the parking and loading bylaw for any of the current tenants at the shops. Again, Marker owns 6 parking stalls underground at the pier, and those will become part of the hotel parking. So what will Sidney Water Partnership contribute? The end pontoon, 100% of the Beacon Wharf building costs. The costs related to the new pontoon deck underneath the Beacon Wharf building. The proportionate share of the electrical, sewer, water, drain services and building permit costs. Annual crown lease fees that will be passed on by the town. Annual property taxes. And through an arrangement, we will provide project management fees at a cost of 5% of the costs related to the town portion of the project. Town of Sidney contributions, all project costs not covered by Sidney Waterfront Partnership Group, which include removal of the existing wharf structure, pontoon towing, refurbishment and moorage, abutment and ramp, anchoring, renewal and amendment of any required water lot leases, proportionate share of the building permit costs, 2 additional 10-year ground lease renewal options, and a deposit and monthly option fee for the pontoon purchase rights during the approximately 2 to 3 years that we believe it'll take to go through the permitting process to get the project underway. Town of Sidney benefits, a solution to the wharf problem. Almost $1 million in contributed value by SWP Group. Expanded tax base. SWP experience and expertise in a coast-based project management, which will result in significant cost savings. Ensure that there's continued investment in the shops through additional 10-year ground lease. The point that we're making here is that because we have a limited time left on the leasehold interest that we have in the shops, there'll be more incentive to invest in the property with the additional 10-year ground lease renewals. Marina portion of the land lease severed and allowed for valuable cleanup and rear of town. So as I mentioned on the overhead, as the land lease itself includes a portion of Port City Marina, and through the 3P project, we will sever that portion and the town will gain control of that portion of the leased area. The project will include a green infrastructure project. It'll be based on the geothermal system demonstrated at the pier. Some may not know that the pier building actually has a very successful geothermal system. It's an open loop geothermal system through the ocean. We could do a similar system and will do a similar system with this Beacon Wharf replacement project. Additional Town of Sidney benefits, a new regional class destination and focal point, creating vibrancy along key waterfront area. A unique connection to the water via the creation of numerous public amenities and facilities, a gathering place, water level access, moorage, washrooms, free parking, an access point to downtown from the water. So our investment decision, we have presented our pro forma investment analysis to the town, and really in the investment return for SWP is based on 8 hotel rooms and leasing the restaurant space with some additional commercial space. At the end of the day, the rate of return for SWP really is marginal. However, there are intangible benefits that have some weight in the investment decision. These are the 50-year lease, including options for the shops ground lease. So again, provides the 50-year lease term provides additional investment return certainty, enables City Waterfront Partnership Group to invest in higher leasehold improvements and more extensive leasehold improvements. We can consolidate the parking with specific uses rather than pay parking for general use. And we believe there'll be a synergy for the area with all the assets that we have in the area, where 1 + 1 will equal 3. Be a more attractive and valuable area. So the go or don't go decision, as mentioned, the financial return for both parties is really minimal. There's shared investment risk. And the key factors are intangible returns. So how is a go decision justified? It's really, are the intangible returns great enough? So to illustrate and discuss and frame the intangible returns, I'd like to use this planning concept of placemaking. So placemaking is a process through which we work together to shape our public spaces. Placemaking is the process that creates great public spaces. Great public spaces are often valued based on intangible benefits for the community and often made great as a result of synergies with private businesses. So what are some great places and public spaces that help define Sidney? Port Sidney Marina and the shops at Port Sidney certainly do. Beacon Avenue, the Pier Hotel and Beacon Park, Lochside Linear Park, the new skate park. So I'm going to take you through a bit of a history of some of these projects and the roles that staff and council played in making them become reality. So this is a photograph of Beacon Avenue. As you can see, it looks like it's sometime in the probably the late 80s, early 90s. And the council at the time undertook to really improve Beacon Avenue. You can see that it was characterized by overhead electrical lines. Some of the power poles looked like they were ready to fall down, narrow sidewalks, and not a really inviting main street. So the mayor really took this on, and it wasn't necessarily a popular decision. He was actually reluctant to walk down Beacon Avenue because some business owners were not happy with the proposal. But council and staff stuck with it and pushed it through. And as we know, Beacon Avenue today has become recognized as one of the great downtown main streets, small town main streets in British Columbia. Port Sidney and the shops at Port Sidney. Here's a shot of the area of Port Sidney Marina and the shops at Port Sidney. It had a history of, there was some marina and boat servicing, and there's actually a mill at one point in time in the general area. It was remade with substantial fill, new buildings, and extensive hard and soft landscaping. It had significant opposition, especially from local homeowners. You know that Councillor Wainwright can attest to some of the outcry that took place during this process. As we know, it just turned into a tremendous component of the waterfront, and this is a view of obviously Port Sidney and shops at Port Sidney after the process. Beacon Park and the pier, we discussed this earlier. Here's Beacon Park and the pier after, and there was a very significant public process where staff and together to make this become reality. Lochside Road before, again, overhead electrical lines, really didn't have any notable pathway or landscaping alongside it. It took place in 2 phases: undergrounding the power lines and removal of the power poles, and then a linear park beautification. It really, believe it or not, lacked support at the time, and council had to find an alternative approach to actually get it through. Again, I think the results speak for themselves. It's really a tremendous feature of the town of Sidney. Here's a favorite of mine, the old skate park. I know that when the proposal came forward, there were significant concerns from residents related to noise and the potential for nefarious activity. And it's really turned into one of the, I drive by it every day on my way home from work. It's really an active, tremendous asset to the town. I can tell you there's a certain sector of the population that recognize Sidney not for its books or Main Street or its waterfront. It recognizes it for its great skate park. So valuing intangibles, common characteristics of all of these initiatives. They resulted in change, and people generally don't like change. They had controversy, opposition. They were very costly. Staff and political support saw them through to completion. And ultimately, they were a success, and they were measured by intangible values. All great places and public spaces that help define Sidney. So what are the goals of the presentation tonight? We're presenting a high value, what we really believe is a rare opportunity. I'd like to illustrate the value of a P3 project and the win-win that it represents. We'd like to see council resolve that it sees merit in the SWP proposal and include the SWP P3 proposal as a key option for the Beacon Wharf replacement public consultation. So with that, open to any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Cronquist, and I'll open it to the floor for my colleagues. Any questions? Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. A few things I was wondering about. First of all, I'm thinking about the little old fish market that's there, and it's sort of an iconic structure there, and it's probably on every postcard that there is of Sidney. And whether you've thought of whether there might be any opportunity to not necessarily preserve it, because I'm pretty sure that's not possible, but if there's any design elements that you might be able to incorporate in your new structure that would at least be, a tip of the hat to the heritage that once existed there.
Well, we do recognize, and as you mentioned, the building it really is iconic. I think that it's difficult to really pay homage to it to the extent that you might like to see. We'd like to actually replace it with something that will become even a more recognizable and iconic building. And I think a good kind of analogy to it was the old bandstand that used to be in Beacon Park that had kind of a similar kind of sentiment towards it. I actually had, on one occasion, somebody was making a sandwich for me at the office that we were working at the time, and she was upset because we were moving the bandstand. And I think the new pavilion in Beacon Park has really turned into something that's ultimately more iconic than the bandstand, and I think that's really what we'd like to see with the new building.
Right. Okay. And another one, if I may. So as you know, the town has had an SNC-Lavalin do an assessment of the pontoons, and as the owner of the pontoons, have you already done your assessment of the condition that they're in, or is that something additional that you would take on just to make sure it meets the requirements for the building and structures you want to put there?
Well, I can answer that in kind of a number of phases. Obviously, when we first purchased the pontoons, we had, they're called Hay & Company at the time. I went down and did an assessment of the pontoons when they were in Hood Canal. And based on that assessment, we purchased, roughly a kilometer of the bridge. So we felt strongly that the pontoons themselves were in terrific condition. As mentioned, because of all of the different projects that they're involved in and all the different buyers that have acquired the pontoons, they themselves put them through their own due diligence, and they passed, flying colors, I guess is a one way to put it. The pontoons are made they were engineered by Army Corps of Engineers, keep in mind, to have an interstate highway on top of them. And I think the longevity of the pontoons is just something that we don't question, and we're willing to, invest in putting a building on top of the pontoon. So all those, really indicate our belief in the structural integrity of the pontoons.
Right. Okay, that's great. Thanks. Also, in regards to, there sounds like there's some community space available. Is that in the building, I believe? And I'm thinking about, we have an art association that is looking for new space, and I'm wondering if, based on what you have planned there, whether something like an art gallery might be a suitable use of that space that you're envisioning.
Well, the space that outside of the restaurant space and the hotel space would be 400 square feet. That would be totally at the discretion of the town of Sidney. I don't know if they'd like to use those. I know there's always discussion about public washrooms. Is that something that the town would like to see there? We will have some commercial space, about 600 square feet. That will just be market commercial, and we'll work with tenants for that. We envision something that's likely a bit more marine influenced as a result of that, but or food and beverage. But we'd certainly talk to individual prospective tenants and see what they have to offer for sure.
Right. Okay, that's good. Thank you very much.
Councillor Falla?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Cronquist. I appreciate your presentation. It gives me much better ability to imagine what you see as a vision for here and to get a sense of that. I have a question regarding the actual pontoon. In some of the research I did, I came across a newspaper article from 1979 from the Hood Canal. And one of the quotes that came out of that, it said that pontoon bridges were designed for calm lakes, not currents, tides, and giant waves. So I realize a bridge is somewhat different than a wharf, but you still have a finger going out from the land. Can you address that at all?
Yeah, I think what you read there was probably what took place in 1979.
Yep.
Is there was a operator error that resulted in a catastrophic failure of the west side of the bridge, and the pontoons themselves are giant caissons. They're void inside, and they have hatch covers on them. And an enormous storm hit the west side of the Hood Canal Bridge, and apparently the operators or the maintenance people had left hatch covers open. And as a result, they filled up with water, and the west side actually sunk. Having said that, you can see especially with the photograph that I showed you earlier, they're more than capable of taking the wind and wave activity at Hood Canal. And we had a study from Hanco when we had our original marina proposal put forward. And they did a significant wind and wave study for the exact area that we're proposing to put the pontoon, and demonstrated that it would work well as a wave attenuator for that location. And floating pontoons are used around the world in all kinds of conditions and circumstances. So I think that article is probably relating to something that was just an unfortunate event that took place back in those days. But I think you have engineers that have worked for the town in SNC-Lavalin, and engineers that we've engaged that all attest to the fact that it will work well at this location.
Okay, thank you. And one other question, and that is regarding the age of this actual pontoon. Now, we're looking at, 50, 60 years of age at this point, and we're looking at long-term of the base of this project as well. What kind of a life does a pontoon such as what you've got have?
Well, we're certainly of the belief, because we're looking for a 50-year lease term, ultimately, that it'll last at least 50 years. It's really difficult. Again, this is built by Army Corps of Engineers. The concrete itself is incredibly hard, and so we just believe that it has that kind of lifespan.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Any other question? Councillor Rintoul?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Cronquist, thank you for the presentation. Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Great to be reminded of the sort of history of cooperation and partnership between SWP and the town of Sidney. And we're certainly pleased that you've expressed interest in an opportunity in working with the town on this project, and look forward to hopefully seeing public weigh in on this as an option. So appreciate your time this evening. Could you just speak a little bit about moorage? I know you touched on it in the presentation, And I'm assuming mortgage isn't something that you'd have a direct interest in operating. I don't know that the town does, but certainly there's some other synergies in the community, some commercial operations that I think would have a strong interest in mortgage of this nature. But just speak a little more specifically to that opportunity, and also maybe compare it to the facility in Port Alberni, which again was one of your sections of floating bridge and how it's worked. And I know there's a photo in your presentation that showed some of the wharf, the fingers that came off the wharf for mortgage. If you'd talk about that as a success story, if that is indeed the case, please.
Yeah, in terms of mortgage, with our economic model, we haven't included mortgage as a part of our economic model, as you've mentioned. We aren't marine operators, and we think there's others that could take on that opportunity more successfully. We believe that there would be opportunity probably to put some sort of facility or provisions in place on the pontoon that would provide for seasonal mortgage. We'd look at that being more of a kind of a permanent feature of the pontoon that would allow for mortgage. We see it that there would likely be opportunities for things like the ferry to Sidney Spit and overnighting or short-term mortgage where people could come and visit with the town. With respect to Port Alberni, I honestly don't know a whole lot about what they've done with their mortgage up there. So I can't really speak to that, but I think there will be, as you mentioned, a good partner and good opportunity for seasonal mortgage that will allow people to access downtown via the pontoons.
Anybody else wish to ask? Go ahead. Seeing none. Oh, sorry, there's a hand up. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Sorry, just a couple other things. Getting back to the mortgage, so would it include space for like launching kayaks or paddle boards, that sort of thing?
Yeah. Hey, Mike, maybe I can answer some of this, being the more the marine guy.
Okay.
So, you have the floor.
Yeah, I think Councillor Rintoul, you'd asked this question previously in a discussion we had with the committee. And, one of the things that we see, like the mortgage opportunity isn't really, I think it's more valuable as a community amenity. And, whether that's access for kayaks, paddle boards, the connection to the Gulf Islands Marine Park, obviously there would have to be some controls put on it as to the comings and goings and making sure people didn't tie up there forever. But that is such an underutilized, I think, asset of the community that the town of Sidney is actually the center of boating for all of the Gulf Islands, but yet really doesn't have its own public connection. And we really see that as one of the amenities that this pontoon can offer. Whether that is launching kayaks at the lowest level, I mean, it's only a 15-20 minute kayak over to Sidney Spit, or a connection that water into CM Harbor. All of those things are I think more valuable than some sort of temporary moorage as a business opportunity. So that's really, I think, how we would see it. You're not seeing us jump at the opportunity to rent space out to the first people that want to tie up. So, really this is more about a community amenity.
Okay. And also, I'm wondering, have you had any discussions with Port Sidney Marina about what their future plans might be? And I'm thinking about, you mentioned that you might have a spot for maybe Sidney Spit Ferry or maybe moorage, based on your comments just now. But if that was something that they were already planning, perhaps, would that, sort of pull that off your plate, so to speak?
But potentially, of course. I know Andrew personally very well, and I think they are obviously a piece of the waterfront. They're a business, but they're part of the amenity as well. And sitting down with them and deciding, what not to duplicate and what to make a community asset versus something that is a business asset. I think Mike referred to We could look for an operator to just operate moorage there. They would be the obvious first choice because they already have an operation right beside there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so, well, that's good. It sounds like sort of it's in your mind at least to have some kind of discussion with them as part of your planning process so that there's, as you say, no duplication or of services, I guess.
Correct.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, I just have one question myself. With regards to the ramp and vehicle traffic, I was sort of consulting with the SNC Lavalin report. They mentioned, delivery trucks, emergency in terms of ambulance and police car, but not a fire truck. So I guess I'm just wondering how we would fight a structural fire. Is that an expectation it would be done from the water, or do you have any comment on that?
I think that Councillor Wayne might be able to speak to that. I think that was something, Councillor Rintoul, that was something that was covered at a committee level. My understanding is that there's a requirement by the fire department to be able to get down there and have a pickup truck turn around. Typically, you're going to have some sort of fire pumping that's going to be on a pontoon of this nature. So I assume that's what they'd be looking to. But honestly, we haven't fully explored that. I know that the subcommittee had taken a look at that, though.
Councillor Wainwright?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the fire department was made aware of this, and they have apparatus that they acquired actually quite a while ago for fighting fires at, for example, Van Isle Marina or Port Sidney, where they've got to get down the jetties and out, in the fingers and potentially fight either a yacht or a boathouse with a yacht in it. So they felt that they didn't need to get one of the larger apparatus down there, that the portable would handle it, and if they can get an ambulance down, they were comfortable. But when detailed design is done, I'm sure they're going to have a hard look at it, and if there's a need to revisit that, we certainly will.
Anybody? Mayor McGill-Smith?
Just excuse me 1 second. I'm going to have to sign off, but Grant's going to stay on, and I'm going to go to my next presentation. But thanks for the opportunity to present tonight.
Thank you. Mayor McGill-Smith?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Cronquist, for your presentation, and Mr. Rogers. Excellent information, particularly to go to the engagement process with the community. A question pertaining to the memorandum of understanding that was presented, and perhaps you give some insight to the decision for SWP to participate in this 3P project, financially not paying rent for the building on the wharf, but contributing financially to the costs of the refurbishment of the wharf.
So the question is, why did we look at the contribution instead of paying rent?
Yes.
I think either or is acceptable. The simplicity of just a capital contribution was something that we thought was, I think it was one of the things that was discussed and looked at with Andrew and Randy and at staff level. But I think we've made it clear that we were open to looking at it either way.
Oh, that's great. Thank you again.
Seeing no other questions, thank you very much, Mr. Rogers, and we'll move on to the next part of the agenda. Next up is the Beacon Wharf recommended options for consideration and a presentation by Mr. Rob Milne, who's the chair of the town's Beacon Wharf Select Committee. And the floor is yours, sir. Oh, just you need to unmute there. Sorry, Mr. Milne, if you could just unmute.
There we go.
Perfect.
Sorry, I don't unmute there.
Not a problem, thank you.
I'm getting used to it all the time, of course. Okay, well, good evening, everybody. And like I said, this is the summary presentation for the Beacon Wharf Committee. So, as you see, the fish market there on the front page is, of course, something that we've referred to many times. So the Beacon Wharf Committee consists of 3 councillors, as I guess everybody is aware, Councillor Duncan, Councillor Rintoul, and Wainwright. Myself and Scott Dallimore, who I know is also on the call, are the 2 people that were appointed by council from the public. And on our first meeting last August, I ended up being selected to chair the meetings. So hence also giving this presentation to summarize it all tonight. Just so that I don't forget later on, I do want to give a special call out and thanks to tremendous support from the town staff that have been in all of the meetings and helping a lot in the background, Randy Hubble and Jen and Allison and Andrew. We have had, since last August when we got going, we have had meetings basically every month and have yet to ever be able to all meet in person, of course, because of all of the COVID restrictions. So it's been actually turned out to be an excellent exercise. We've all enjoyed it, I think, quite a bit under all the difficult circumstances. And my shout out to the people at the town for tremendous support for helping us get through a lot of work here. Before getting into a couple of the options, a little bit of the background of how we got going and the input that we used. So as you all know, the Beacon Wharf was divested by the government in 2006. And at that time, it was already viewed as aging infrastructure. Repairs that were completed in 2012 extended its life, but restricted use, vehicle access and other use being restricted because of the wear and tear and age of the infrastructure. More repairs completed in 2020. We have basically now set an end of life in our minds, based on all of the engineering input, of about 2028, maybe about 7 more years, short of some heroic measures, and some condition assessment and other repairs may still be required to get that far. But basically, for the purposes of this discussion, we're thinking about 2028 as the end of life. Now, the downtown waterfront vision was done, and that has informed some of the input that, of course, we used as well. It identified a rubble mound structure. The key things that we considered were the commercial buildings that would be open to the public, pedestrian access, delivery truck and maintenance vehicle access, as you've been hearing for the P3 proposal, electrical, water, sewer. What the visioning process did not consider was sea level rise, or of course costs. Sea level rise being one of the things that we'll emphasize a lot as we go through a couple of the options that impacted us quite a bit and impact the options quite a bit. In 2019, and this was the last bit of input that really kicked us off, SNC Lavalin's study. Okay, so now there's a key metric here, and just so that everybody is clear on what we're always referring to, because it has a big impact. In the marine world, we talk about chart datum. The Canadian Hydrographic Service sets what is considered to be a water level, like basically the shore level, the sea level that you see at a very low tide, which is 0, and then they chart that, hence the term chart datum. So everything is then measured in elevation above that reference point in the marine world. The existing wharf is actually 5.5 meters above that 0 tide level. And the end of Beacon Avenue is at 6.5 meters above that level. A critical input is the town's interim flood construction level is actually quite a bit higher than that at 7.1 meters to chart datum. And SNC Lavalin, when they did their report in 2019, they recommended that replacement wharf elevations would be between 8 and 11 meters high. So if you look at that and compare it to the height of today's wharf, you see how much tremendous elevation change we're talking about. And that's really key to understand and for the public to understand when options are discussed. At a high tide, you're looking today at about 3.6 meters. So really, as the storm picture there illustrates, you're talking about a high tide that's only a couple of meters below today's wharf. Hence the storm wave. And then when you consider up to a 0.8 meter sea level rise, which they factored in for the scope of this, you really do need to consider seriously the higher elevations. So the select committee mandate, with all of that as the background, looking at the options for replacing or removing and not replacing today's wharf, we were to consider piled as it is today, new versions of that, rubble mound or floating, develop a plan for look at the underlying environmental sightline impacts. Obviously, the connectivity to the shoreline is critical, how it ties into everything that's there today. And then desirability, commercial structures, because given the background and the work that's already gone on, had to be considered. Ongoing maintenance costs, of course, and then where we are today, reporting back to council with our recommendations. Now, one of the first end results that I'll just touch on quickly is the environmental impacts. Now, SNC has a pretty comprehensive habitat study. Right around the wharf itself, I hope the cursor there is maybe visible to you, there's some data gaps that still would need to be addressed in a final analysis. The key takeaway from all of this is that all of the options that we looked at will require some environmental offsetting and mitigation, but all of them are roughly of the same order of magnitude. We saw no showstoppers, nothing that would say one option is completely off the table versus another due to environmental considerations. We don't have, fortunately, a major eelgrass bed or other things that are so critical to the Department of Fisheries, Oceans, and other stakeholders. So environmental was considered, and we had a subcommittee that looked at that, and that was the conclusion there. So we can move on from that part. Oh, sorry. It jumped. So SNC-Lavalin shortlisted in their report 4 options, 3 of which we're quickly discussing here, that we ended up rejecting when we got into an analysis of them. Option 4, 5A, 6, there was a 5B as well, which was another peer piled one. Basically touching a little bit on why all of these were rejected. The first one is what they called option 4, the so-called stepped berm. This cost, $14.2 million, is their estimate for construction only. Include the integration into Beacon Avenue. It would not include integration to the seawall walk or any of parking or any of the other integration issues. Environmental offsetting costs are not included. This was strictly their rough first cost estimate for construction of this. This is basically a plan view with a large rock volume placed in the water and the wharf extending out onto it. 3.5 meters higher than the existing wharf. The sea level rise, the flood construction level requirements, that's 2.5 meters higher than the end of Beacon Avenue as a reference point when you get down there. So you've got this thing, as the next slide shows, this massive elevation change that was modeled for us by the town. You've got this huge ramp going up to this rubble mound structure with a building shown on it. This dark blue line that you can probably see to the right in this image or in the other one up here is basically also the high tide line. So all of this rock is actually exposed at any tide level, even at high tide. A huge amount of rock is exposed. This is the view from Glass Beach. This is the view from the foot of Beacon looking down. Sorry, did it again. Large rock volumes visible at all times. Huge connectivity challenges to Beacon Park. Because of the 3D graphics nature of things, that's the band shell, basically flattened, of course, because of working with the overheads. The parking spaces that are there today, and essentially all of that is seriously affected by this. So we rejected this option. Oh, and also, all of these options, I should mention, have a problem with temporary moorage. When you have rock like that that is piled, how you ever get a dock and a ramp attached to the thing was also viewed as extremely problematic, if not outright impossible. A piled wharf, option 5A as they called it, the suspended deck, also at 9 meters above chart 0 tide, so 3.5 meters higher again than the existing wharf, 2.5 meters higher than the end of Beacon again. Meeting the flood construction level for the buildings, smaller footprint than today. but again, rejected because once again, you have this huge issue of ramping up to something like this from the foot. On the right here, you also see how it's basically a small hammerhead shape. It's actually not very large, commercial, difficult. And again, this integration, you look at that and you think, here's Beacon Park. When you actually, there's another view that we didn't include in the presentation that actually shows from Beacon Park. You're looking right under this platform between the piles. It's that high. So it really is a bad visual impact, bad integration. And again, the same serious impact to the parking area near there as well. So again, that was those reasons, again, rejecting this option. Similarly, and again, option 6, 14.1, almost the same cost, far more expensive because of all the rock than the pier, than the pile, but cost was not obviously a major factor as much as it is for rejecting them. This marginal wharf, this one we looked at partly because it's 1 meter lower, only 8 meters higher. And so it was the lowest elevation for a non-floating option. So we definitely still included it. This hammerhead very tight to shore, however, to try to get the thing 1 meter lower. And with all of the rock here around it, you can see it barely read there, toe of riprap, it says, out in the water. So 2.5 meters higher than the existing wharf again. You're quite high still, of course. But it's reduced a little bit because of this hammerhead shape, as it says, along the shoreline rather than sticking out as far into the ocean. So once again, rejected for the visual impact. Even though it's a meter lower, it was considered to have, it's so close to shore, the gap of water from Beacon Park out to the rock hanging up in your face, we almost wondered why wouldn't you just close it in completely, like why bother trying to separate it? The huge impact of parking, and once again, as with the other rock option, how you would ever connect moorage, have a dock off of the thing because of that stepped, huge rock structure viewed as just almost insurmountable as a problem. So at this point, just want to mention before actually touching on the rest of these two other key options, all of the options then that are fixed height, whether it was on piles or on rock, have all been rejected. And the committee rejected all of them largely because when you think about it, between sea level rise and the flood construction level that's coming with that, all of the options to accommodate a structure are simply too high. And the view and the integration to shore are all just too difficult to deal with. What that leaves us with are two options. There's a floating option, and you heard already a proposal, the proposal from SWP, but in general, a floating option is one physical option that you can do without getting into the huge sightline problems and the integration problems. Or the one that, of course, has always been on the table, remove the Beacon Wharf at the end of the life and just don't replace it. With the estimated 7 to 8 years life remaining, some condition inspections required, and maybe some additional repairs, what that would require, because you'd have 7 years to do this, the committee basically felt there would need to be time taken to reimagine what the options for the area would be like with Beacon Wharf gone. How to integrate the end of Beacon Avenue, the Beacon Park, the Seawall Walk, and that area. How to actually do that is something that would then have to be reimagined if it was gone. There'd be time to do that, of course, because we're assuming here that it would be in around 2028, or whenever it was actually removed, and that was done. So as you've already heard, the floating option. Now, SNC-Lavalin, I was listening to the questions, obviously, earlier. So SNC-Lavalin, we had them go and actually look at the pontoon physically. They have found no structural issues, serious ones to worry about. They emphasize things such as if the concrete was going to fail, the problem would show up likely on the surface, because once salt starts to affect the rebar inside structurally reinforced concrete like that, it would eventually expand and crack, and you'd see anything of that. They have mentioned that one of the options for us to consider would be to, if we went with that option, would be to dry dock it and do a more thorough analysis of it ourselves before then doing the refurbishment work that would be required and putting it in place. There's some additional engineering work obviously required for it, and that would be things such as putting across the platforms, using an under space that's underneath that's in there today for the sewer water power to get there. Essentially, this is, so as I said, this is a specific floating solution that we considered. And other floating solutions, sure, but they would be starting from scratch. So given that this is an existing piece of structure that should be able to do the job, as long as any due diligence showed that it does have that 50 years of life that we know we want, then it's an option. When SNC-Lavalin first talked to us about it before they did their own inspection, they had expressed concerns about a floating pontoon structure being able to handle a building on it, such as this. After they had done the analysis and the study they did for us, their conclusion was that yes, you could have a structure on there, you could have a restaurant or something like that operating on there, and it should be all right. To start from scratch and design and engineer and then build something else would be a whole different undertaking, obviously, with all of the risks of then associated doing that and then hoping to get a tenant or somebody, a commercial license or something to work with it. Whereas the SWP proposal is at least something with a structure that's already in place, as well as the partner to actually operate it. Hence, it's one of the recommended options. It's noted that it was noted by Mike, and we note that it's about a 6.5 meter draft. So in order to get it close enough to shore, as this picture illustrates, with the piles here and then the ramp down to the pontoon, there's dredging that would be required. So one of the things that would have to be looked at with a bit geotechnical would be geotechnical assessment of doing these piles, how to anchor or secure the pontoon on the seaward side, as well as ensuring that dredging is hopefully just removing soft material and not a huge difficult problem. The size of it pushes it beyond the water lot lease. So there's an application required to the province to amend the water lot lease if this option was pursued. So that's noted as well. The benefits of it from the perspective of the committee, looking at it from basically our side, because all of the fixed options, whether rubble mound or pile secured, were rejected, this is viewed now as the only viable option for keeping a wharf, at least at the moment. With the partnership, a P3 partnership, and we looked at that through the subcommittee, as was mentioned, it reduces the cost and risk of the town. Going back to what our objectives were when we established the committee, we achieved the goal of commercial activity on the wharf. There's property taxes and or lease revenues to the town. This does accommodate moorage. Moorage both in the little inner basin, but it could also accommodate, as was mentioned, 266 feet of potential moorage along either side seasonally, we assume, that could be there and operated for whether it's the Sidney Spit water taxi or other types of small commercial vessels or public coming to town. Hopefully we all love to get the Thursday night market back on Thursday nights, all kinds of options potentially. Large gathering space for the public, obviously, to be out on these outer spots for presentations, fireworks displays, et cetera, et cetera. We talked about all those things. The project manager working on the town's behalf as part of their proposal, being motivated to try to keep the costs obviously low, is we view as a serious upside. And the town owns space on the ground floor to use it. It's obviously quite a bit bigger than the wharf today, so it does increase, as I was just mentioning, the public space. And it does minimize the view impacts, especially compared to any of the other options that, that we studied. Borrowing implications have been looked at. The first note there is one that I think we all just need to take into account as a reality. Waterfront infrastructure is not cheap to build and maintain, especially in an ocean environment. There's no reserve set aside. Roughly, if our, as in the town's contribution is $5 million, then the numbers that you see here, which works out to about $6 to $8 per $1 million borrowed per household, are the current estimates, or about $30 to $38 if it was the $5 million amount, with the cost of the town obviously partially offset. There's the possibility of grant opportunities, but of course, everyone's waiting to, I guess, understand. You probably understand a lot better than some of us do about what grant opportunities might be coming up with infrastructure programs, with their considered so-called shovel-ready, and so on, especially in a post-COVID world. So the other option that is still obviously considered viable is to simply remove the wharf at the end of its life, do not replace it. So we said, estimating that's about 2028, with about 7 to 8 years life. There's a cost to remove the wharf. Now, the cost to remove the wharf is then factored into all of the costs on every one of the options that's in the report. Reimagining the Beacon Wharf area, as we said, because this is something that would be taking place several years from now, getting into the level of detail of saying, well, what would the town do down there is something that needs to be worked through, and then possibly another whole public engagement aspect to it, if this was the decision that the town goes with after the public engagement. So speaking of public engagement, basically the committee is recommending that engagement kick off early September and would run until about mid-October, so about 6 weeks. The committee, although it's wrapping up right now, has committed to help with development of the engagement material. We have proposed a special edition of Town Talk, using social media, the town's website. No formal open house is proposed. Part of that might have been driven by ongoing unknowns about the difficulty of doing that as COVID winds up, we hope, finally. But pop-up engagement and storyboards at the Beacon Wharf, other things that are outdoors could certainly be done, with the assumption that there would be a report back to council in October, November for a decision about how to proceed to next steps. And I guess that went fairly quickly, but basically, yes, I just want to once again say thank you for everybody, Scott, who I know is on the call, the other person from the community, the town people, the councillors. We haven't, like I said, we haven't had a chance to meet in person, but we've certainly had spirited conversations, and it's been, I think, a wonderful experience, and one that I personally very much enjoyed. And what you see here are a couple of pictures that we included. One from the 90s, another one from 1957, so we're seeing a lot of history tonight. But we put that up because we're thinking that what we're really talking about here is the next step in the evolution of Sydney's waterfront, the town we all love, and that's really where this is going, with one of these options or another. So I guess at that point, yeah, questions.
Thank you, Mr. Milne, and I'll open it up to committee members for questions. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Milne, for that presentation. And just also like to say, well, special thank you to you and my colleagues on council and staff, and Mr. Dallymore as well, who put an extraordinary amount of time and focus into this. It's a really complex task and very important implications for our waterfront in our community. And most citizens might not have the time to go through all the minutes and all the reports, but I did, and I appreciate very much the amount of work that you've all put into delving into this. So thank you for that. A couple of questions. I was wondering, I'm still a little bit fuzzy. I don't know if this is a question for you or to staff, in terms of the costs and the contribution by SWP. So when we're calculating the costs, so for the pontoon, are we purchasing it from them, or are they contributing that to the project? That was a bit fuzzy for me.
I'll start, and then I'd like obviously everybody that was on the committee and the staff that are all here to jump in. When we first saw the pontoon, they basically mentioned it separately to us before the P3 effort really got engaged. It was listing it at $795,000. You might have seen that referenced in some of the minutes.
Yeah.
The P3 proposal, as you mentioned tonight, is that they would contribute that as a portion of their input to the project. So it, unless Randy, if you want maybe, or somebody else could jump in, my understanding is no, the town does not actually purchase it. They contribute it as part of their contribution to the project.
Yeah, I can just, if I may, I can jump in on that. Yeah, indeed, what they list in their proposal is a contribution, is the contribution of the pontoon itself, and refurbishment costs, etc., would be the responsibility of the town beyond that initial contribution of the infrastructure.
Okay, thanks. And then, thank you for that. And I was also a little bit fuzzy about the revenue sharing arrangement, and I know it was our member McNeil Smith asked a question about this earlier, and it seemed that there was a connection between the revenue sharing agreement and the contribution of the pontoon. Is it one or the other? I'm a little bit fuzzy about that as well. Or those completely unrelated
Okay,
things.
Mr. Hastings wants to weigh in on that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. The potential revenue sharing is not related to the contribution of the pontoon. It's just as per the terms of the MOU, Sidney Waterfront Partnership is unable to commit at this time to lease payments over and above property taxes. What they have opened the door to is potential sharing of net revenues if the revenues from the commercial operation exceed the projections that were shared with us.
Okay, so would I be correct then in assuming that if they don't make the amount of revenue that they're anticipating, that we would not get a lease payment then?
That is the way that we are anticipating it will go. Those details will be fleshed out in the ultimate agreement should we get that far. But yes, if they're short of projections, it's their loss. But if they're above projections, the town could stand to gain a little more.
Right, okay, good. And then just a question on public engagement or comment. So I think the idea about having a town talk that focuses in on this and gives some detailed information is important. I think people need that to make an educated, an informed decision about this. I would though like to see a bit more of opportunity for people to, in person, to engage. I think, for example, the session that staff did for the Gallaran parking situation some time back, where residents had an opportunity to presentation and ask questions and have discussion, was good. So I throw that out there as something that I think would be of benefit. Also, if you could comment a bit on my recollection when we were talking about public engagement initially was that there would be two phases. That, the first phase we would be asking the public, what is that you would like to see in that particular area, and that we would be asking them for feedback on that. And then once we gathered that and looked at other options and put things together, we would go out a second time and said, okay, based on your feedback, based on the structures that we think are suitable for certain purposes, we recommend these sorts of things. So it seems like we've fast forwarded directly to, the two options people get is there's no wharf or you get a wharf with a restaurant and maybe a few other things. So during the public engagement, it sounds like there's just going to be one public engagement process, not two. And would they have an opportunity to give ideas in terms of some of the things that they'd like to see there? Or is this kind of cast in stone?
I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright to answer that question for you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it really has not been a fast track to get where we are, because you've got to remember that we started a couple of years ago commissioning the SNC Lavalin report to see what the options were before we even, formed this committee. The committee took the time to work through the options and has concluded that several of them aren't reasonable to put forward, largely because of those visual costs, and there are a lot of challenges in terms of integrating it with Beacon Park and the Waterfront walkway and all. So at the end of the day, we're really left with two options, one of them being a floating option, and the other one being remove Beacon Wharf and don't replace it. There was some potential that we could have looked at other floating structures. You could have gotten a custom build, but after looking at the package that the SWP group has put together, it's very clear that a typical developer wouldn't touch this because the profit margin is just too thin. The return on the investment required isn't there for a typical developer. SWP is in a unique position basically because, one, they've got a floating pontoon they're motivated to sell. They've got a huge investment in Sidney. A development with any kind of commercial use would need parking, which would be a real challenge because there's no land involved in the site. But SWP actually has parking immediately adjacent to the area that they can put towards it. So SWP is in a position that essentially no other developer is going to be able to match. And even for them, the return is largely intangibles. So we felt it was just not worth the effort and delay of putting it out to an RFP because we did not expect anyone else would even respond. Not to the where we are. As far as are we only going to talk to the public once? Well, the plan is to put out the information that's come out of the committee's work, getting us down to two options and getting the public to weigh in on that. But with the amount of money that we're talking about, I think the odds are fairly high that we're going to have some borrowing. And that suggests that there will be a process where the public gets to weigh in on the borrowing. So that's the second round of engagement. And for all I know, there might be some other as we get into detailed design, and there are a couple of different designs that the proponents want to put forward. But I would expect there's going to be at least two, this initial round, and then something about the approving the funding for it. And actually, come to think of it, there's going to be a need for rezoning too, because the zoning for the water does not allow that commercial use. So there'll be a public hearing too. So I think there'll be plenty of public process. Thank you.
CAO Mr. Humble.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, just to weigh in and follow up on Councillor Wainwright's comments, there was also discussion, quite a bit of discussion at the committee level about the potential for a floating wharf without a structure, without a building on it, and the discussion or the concerns with that. We looked at the feasibility of spending $7 to $8 million on basically a floating structure without any commercial entity, without any building on it. So, we looked at that aspect, and it was really tough. I think there was consensus at the committee level to be able to justify the potential expenditure of that kind of money for just a floating structure that extends out on the water without any commercial or additional amenity space. So again, that was looked at and discussed as part of the process.
Yeah, okay. And one more, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So in terms of risk of completion of the project, I wonder if the committee members or staff have any concerns about that and ways we might mitigate the risk to the taxpayer. And what I'm thinking about is the fact that, as the SWP has indicated, this is a pretty skinny proposal. There's lots of work to be done on the pontoons itself to get them fixed up, and then they're going to construct a building. And I just wonder, when there's such a narrow margin, do we have any concerns about the construction starting on the building, and then there's, I don't know, another pandemic or economic impacts that make it that SWP is no longer able to complete the project, and then we're left with a half-built structure. I'm just wondering if that was anything that the committee considered as noteworthy or not, in terms of risk.
I'll go to Councillor Rentoul. I think he can speak to that.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll speak to a couple of points, if I may, Mr. Chair. But the discussion around the what if scenario that you described didn't come up. I'll tell you what was a common theme, though, was recognizing the intangible benefits. And so if a business venture were not to succeed in the manner in which we would anticipate that it would, with the support from the community and at that location, those intangible benefits are worthy of addressing, as the CAO noted, that with or without a structure, we felt that this is most cost effective to proceed in this manner with the type of partnership that's been proposed here from a reputable local company who we've worked with before, and felt a lot of surety in doing so. And so, no, we didn't dwell on the what ifs a business on the wharf were to fail. And I think by nature of not securing a lease payment long term indicates sort of what level of financial risk there is for the town. We weren't going to receive a lease payment at any rate. They're putting everything in up front in terms of their work to help rehabilitate the structure and make it viable for the town's use. I do want to go back, though, I beg your pardon, Mr. Chair, to the question you had around this initial engagement as potentially the only engagement, and I think Councillor Wainwright answered that very well. It'll be quite a fulsome process. But also the initial engagement, and Rob, you did an excellent job with this presentation, and you touched on engagement. One of the components that's actually in the written report talks about engaging with First Nations around this piece, talks about engaging with, very importantly, the current tenants, and talking to them about what this could look like for their future, and talking about stakeholders, Port Sidney Marine as an example, as a neighboring business. So this first phase is not only not the only element of consultation, but it's multi-focused. And that engagement with those other businesses in the community is extremely important. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much for all of that. That's good for me.
Okay, Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Chair. I had actually wanted to go back again to the public engagement piece, and Councillors Wainwright and Rentoul have covered it, but I was thinking that the initial engagement was actually done, and Rob has covered it with the downtown the waterfront vision. And so the phase of the public input process, where people could kind of come forward with what they envisioned very broadly for that area, has already been done. And that's what fed into the initial assessment of what the options were by the engineers. And then those options were then what fed into this process. So I think it's going to be important for us to make clear to the public that we're not going to go all the way back to reimagining right from scratch what could be done, because that whole process has been done, and it's not set in stone what will be on, what could be there on that potential wharf. I mean, we're very limited. The engineering assessment and the visual assessments have made it very clear that the laws of physics are going to constrain us, and the laws of finances are going to constrain us very substantially. And so what we've kind of come up with of options are not set in stone. They're actually, I think, probably broader than I even thought they would be. The fact that we can get as much temporary moorage onto that floating structure as they've been able to suggest we can is great. And the size of the commercial space, I think, is really impressive. It's more than what we have now. And so I think the options we have, there's some flexibility about what the town might want to do with the space around it if we go with that option. But going back to another type of structure or something like that, no, I don't think that's something that we could go with now. But and I would also say that we're still having additional input during the OCP process as well. We all have to remember that part of the OCP is actually looking at the downtown as a neighborhood as well, and kind of the overall vision for that, and people will be thinking of that as part of this. So I feel the engagement around this, the wharf and how it fits into the town and this region is pretty robust. Thanks.
Any other questions from any committee members? Councillor Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to Councillor O'Keefe for acknowledging the involvement of all the representatives on the committee. I again want to particularly acknowledge Rob Milne and Scott Dallymore. Thank you for the presentation tonight, but also for your participation on the committee. Members of the public should be aware that these are two community volunteers with knowledge and experience in coastal engineering, and they brought a lot to this process. And also want to thank three colleagues on council with unique experience as well that contributed to this. And of course, we had our 4 senior staff participated well, and thanks to Mr. Cronquist for acknowledging their involvement through the process. Also want to thank SNC-L. They have done a lot of work, and they've presented a lot of good information for staff, for the committee, and for council's consideration, and that will have to be presented to as part of the engagement process. And thank you to Sidney Waterfront Partnership. We heard, and it was great to have it as part of the presentation this evening, that their involvement in the community over some 15 years now, and the remarkable change to the good that has come from various initiatives that they've undertaken. And we can tell that they've certainly done their homework in the presentation of this partnership, 3P partnership for the community, and it's exciting. And again, I want to acknowledge Mr. Rogers and Mr. Cronquist for using the term that I think I used in my inaugural address. That we're talking about placemaking in our community and a sense of place. And we have progressed a long way in 130 years. And when the first town site was initiated, went through an industrial phase that gradually changed from the 50s. We were reminded by our senior manager of long-range planning, Mr. Newcomb, when he gave an OCP presentation recently, to where we are today. And we have a much more vibrant waterfront than we did 20 years ago. Going back to the councils under Mayor Don Amos, and this is another important step forward, and it's a challenge. We know the impact of sea level rise, and want to thank the committee for being able to incorporate and being able to actually tonight. I saw Mr. Milne, the way you presented that will be great. For the community to appreciate. I appreciate it better now, listening to your presentation than I have previously, when I thought I understood it. So, excellent information. It's a great opportunity for our community. I think we'll have a great engagement process, and look forward to hearing the public input on this. My question is coming back to the topic of moorage, And I think this is a real community amenity that I think Mr. Rogers touched on, that this has been lacking in our community. We're in the hub of the Pacific Northwest, in the boating world, and it's something that the boating community and members of the public have wanted for some time. We just haven't had the right infrastructure at the right time to bring it on stream, and I think this presents a unique opportunity. I can certainly appreciate in the SWP presentation, while they won't pursue that particular economic opportunity, I can also appreciate in the staff reports, while the town of Sidney doesn't have the particular expertise or resource to manage moorage, but there are people who do, and I just don't get the sense, and maybe Mr. Milne, as chair of the committee, or any of the other members or staff would want to comment this, but I don't see it. I saw it in SWP's presentation, but I don't really see it necessarily in some of the reports that we're actually looking to move forward, to incorporate moorage on this, and if it's going to require some capital cost up front, that we're actually giving consideration to that in the SNC costing in their assessment report, detailed assessment report. I didn't really see it there. And so I open it up to first you, Mr. Milne, or any others who would like to comment on that, please.
Oh, thank you very much. I guess when we actually spoke with SNC Lavalin and we reviewed their report, and I just flipped back to where the slide is here, one of the things that we talked to them about quite a bit was the ability to have ramps, or one or multiple ramps, down to what could be floating docks. Basically, it was something that I think a number of us on the committee really want to see in order to handle moorage alongside. That thing has quite a freeboard. It would require the kind of lift ramp that you can raise for the off season. The docks themselves, we assume in the winter, would probably have to be removed. So we refer to seasonal moorage as something that would be the goal here. The cost is probably, I doubt very much the cost is actually that huge in a project of this scale, because you're talking about some ramps that can be lifted that go down to floating docks that would be attached in order to get down to the water level. That also might accommodate, by the way, the ability to launch kayaks and small dinghies or other craft, or paddle boards, whatever. But it is something that I think we viewed as very important to be able to do that. I think they just acknowledged it and didn't address it maybe as fully as some of us would have liked to have seen in the S&C report. We didn't want to lose sight of it, though, and it's something that I think, by the way, I did as a bit of an oversight, and thank you, Councillor Rintoul, for pointing that out to me. I meant to actually mention that in the public engagement, we actually cited, and I think Allison actually flagged the exact distance to accommodate all of this. All of the local businesses, including the current tenants, specifically reaching out to Port Sidney Marina to see what their interest would be as part of the consultation, actually separately from just the general public one, because of the moorage opportunity. And then on top of that, of course, as was mentioned, the First Nations. We should go to them. Partly because if you affect the waterfront like this and you get Douglas Treaty fishing rights and so on, you have to engage with them formally anyway. The sooner the better. It's the polite and correct thing to do. So basically the Port Sidney Marina one specifically, to talk to them about the moorage opportunities this might open up, is something that we did discuss.
Councillor Wainwright?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think one of the things that we need to keep in mind is that this isn't a final set of designs or detailed design, right? Like, that's not what the building is going to look like. The architects have not been anywhere near this, right? It's just an illustration. So we know that moorage is possible. And in fact, we've even had some discussion. It could even be pocket cruise ships coming into this thing. But the proposal that's being put in front of us came from the SWP group, who don't have any of the background on moorage and don't really have an interest in that either. So it's not in there. And the I guess a question in my mind was, how far down the road of detailed design are we going to go before we ask the public P3 floating option, and then we'll get into detailed design, or take the thing out and we'll start reimagining what it'll look like when it's gone. And I don't, like, we shouldn't go all the way down each one of those until we get the public to, you know, to weigh in. Like, this is the stage for them to weigh in. We definitely don't want them thinking that there is no possibility of moorage or that we have no interest in moorage. But, you know, please don't view these as, you know, final designs. And you know, we brainstormed a whole bunch of things, like maybe in the sculpture walk to go around the thing, maybe including First Nation elements, and, you know, and so on. The thing is, we'll get there after the public weighs in on, you know, which direction they're leaning towards. Thank you.
Mayor McNeil-Smith?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Wainwright. No, I certainly appreciate, and I think it's important for the public to appreciate that that these are not final designs, such as you know, the building we saw tonight. We have you know, Class D estimates at the time, and we want to do the engagement before we get down into the detailed design. A second item I want to touch on, and this is directed to staff, and this is in a way, in that the SNCL assessment broke out the costs into about 7 different areas. The $7.4 million dollar cost into about 7 different areas. And then in the notes accompanying that chart in other pages, it indicated that costs such as about 5% for project, or sorry, it's elsewhere indicated that, and it was in the SWP presentation this evening, that there would be 5% project management costs for the town portion of the costs, but SNCL referred to 4 to 5% engineering costs. Staff, or in the committee report, it made reference to environmental offset costs and roadway costs, and then there'll actually be the removal of the current wharf as a cost. That these will be presented in the costing information that goes into the engagement process.
Mr. Hisek?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we acknowledge that there are still decisions to be made about how much cost detail to provide for consultation, and certainly the preliminary discussion from council tonight will help to narrow down our focus for what options need to be further fleshed out. So even the most recent discussion now about some potential future design elements like additional floats for moorage, that kind of thing, those are details that we weren't sure whether to reflect in the estimated cost yet or not. But certainly by the time we get to consultation, we expect to have those elements, perhaps the costs of the road connections, all those details further narrowed down, and we'll be projecting the cost in terms of a range from minimum to maximum expected cost.
Thank you, Chair.
Any further questions from committee? I have one, if I could, to Mr. Hisek. Says that cost estimates do not include any applicable taxes, and I'm assuming that we would incorporate that into those numbers you just referred to?
Everything, yes.
Thank you very much. Seeing no other comments or questions, thank you, Mr. Milne, for your presentation. Thank you, Mr. Dallimore, for being around as well. And thank you for your work on everything you've done for the town. And it's volunteering, and it's a lot of work you put in, so thank you very much. Next, we'll move to staff reports, and as brought at the start of the meeting, we'll move to 7B, which is the Beacon Wharf Floating Replacement Assessment. And there's a report dated July 6, 2021, and I will refer to staff if they wish to elaborate on it.
Thank you, Chair. Much of this introduction has already been talked about through Mr. Milne's presentation. However, S&C was contracted to conduct a feasibility study on the floating pontoon structure that Seagate Pontoon currently owns. They inspected it in person, and they found with additional engineering required that it is likely feasible to have that pontoon on the Sydney waterfront. It will require a significant amount of dredging, which is a bit of a risk factor because we don't know. We're assuming right now that it's sand, but there could be some rock, which could complicate the dredging. S&C also evaluated the life cycle costs of several shortlisted options that the committee was looking at that time, and they're described in the report. At this time, we just are recommending that the report be received for information, and the information from S&C be used as part of the engagement materials for the Beacon Wharf replacement.
Thank you, Ms. Clary, and I'll look to see if any committee members have any questions. Seeing none, I just have one quick one. I know these aren't detailed designs, but in terms of the overall look of it, was there a consideration or any issues that staff noted might be a problem for accessibility to and from the structure?
Specifically for the floating pontoon, it wasn't like the slope leading up to the bridge was not designed at this point. We would have to look into that in the detailed design process to make sure it was accessible for wheelchairs. And the actual on the pontoon was also not really reviewed. If you look at S&C's study, it's different. The proposed pontoon is slightly different than SWP's proposal. So SWP's proposal was not reviewed at all for accessibility, and neither was S&C's. However, S&C's is all one level, but that'll be included in the detailed design.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that was out there. Thanks. And seeing nothing else? Oh, Councillor O'Keefe, sorry. Side to side.
Thank you. Just one question, just about the dredging. So is that just a one-time thing in order to get the depth you need to anchor the structure, or is that something that would need to be done on an ongoing basis?
Through the chair to Councillor O'Keefe, we believe it's like a one-time thing. However, if there is movement, we may need to re-dredge if a lot of sand fills the hole. I don't have all the details on that, but they'll come out in the detailed design as well.
Yeah, okay, that's all. Thank you.
Any other questions from community members? Councillor or Mayor Cliff McNeil-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I'll move the recommendation that Council receives the Beacon Wharf pontoon inspection and floating wharf assessment for information.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous. Move on to the next section, 7A. Beacon Wharf final report on recommended option for consideration, and there's a report dated July 6, 2021, and I'll look to staff for an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's basically was summarized in the presentation, so staff have no further comment on it. Thank you.
Okay, great. So any questions on this that anybody has for staff? Any comments? Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to move a recommendation that Council authorize a public engagement process for the future of Beacon Wharf, featuring the two options recommended by the Beacon Wharf Select Committee.
Second.
Any discussion? Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Just a question on that. I noted in some of the minutes somewhere along the line, the committee talked about including some of the rejected options, not necessarily as options, but just including them in the public engagement process, so residents had a better informed information in terms of what was considered and what was rejected. So am I correct in assuming that that would be included, or does that need to be in the motion?
Councillor Wainwright can respond to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The intent was to summarize how we got to where we are and the work that was done by the committee. So yes, part of it is we need to make sure that the community is on board with rejecting the options we did reject and the reasons for doing so. So that would be part of it.
Okay, good. Thank you.
If I could maybe just continue,
Yep,
I certainly support the motion that's in front of us. Just to make it clear, the committee really is not recommending removal of the wharf. The committee unanimously saw merit in keeping a wharf. The option of removing the wharf is really being presented because that is essentially the benchmark. If you don't do the floating structure one, that is the remaining option, and it's more for comparison. I have to say I'm really quite pleased that SWP came forward with this P3 option, because I think the options that our community would have to work with would either be dramatically more expensive and risky, or we would simply have a lot less options to choose from. And as being pointed out in their presentation earlier, the town actually has a history of some successful partnerships with the Marker Group and SWP. And while they were pretty contentious as they developed over the years, there was a lot of public engagement. That public engagement, from my recollection, had a major influence on the final design and outcome of the project. And overall, they've been successful, and the community is now entirely happy with those. So I think this is a good option to be presenting, and it's one that I'm pretty comfortable seeing our community consider. Thank you.
Councillor Fowle?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Councillor Wainwright, for that explanation about how the options came forward and why the options were in there. And I had previously spoken to the consideration of just removing the wharf, not replacing it. And I think we shouldn't get too caught up in, oh my God, we're going to lose the wharf and what happens to our community, and we don't have it, and we're a waterfront community. We have a pedestrian wharf, a fishing pier, right a few steps south of where we've got Beacon Wharf. So it's not like we don't have an access out to the water. What we wouldn't have, and what that doesn't provide, of course, is the commercial space, the moorage, and all the other options that go with it, and those aren't to be disregarded. One of the things that spoke to me in the option from Sidney Waterfront group was day moorage, and we've discussed a little bit here as well, and that has been lacking in Sidney, and that has been talked about for a long time. So although I'm not overwhelmingly personally supportive of going and replacing the wharf with what we're looking at tonight, it's still too early in the process for me to make a decision. This is not the time to be making a decision, but the part that really speaks to me is the day moorage, because I think that's an important part of what is needed and what has been asked for. The other part is to ensure that we have places for kayakers and canoeists and whatnot to access the water and to launch their boats and to get into the water. So I'm happy to move this forward, and I'm looking forward to hearing what the public has to say and how they make their decision and where we go next on this. Thank you.
Councillor Rintoul?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to speak further to Councillor Keith's original question with respect to consultation, and how far back do we go in terms of providing justification for removing some of the options that SNC Lavalin originally presented. Good question, and I think Councillor Wainwright answered it well, but perhaps we also go back and as well just explain the rationale for not continuing to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars into the existing wharf. Meaning, we know that it doesn't meet sort of the flood construction parameters. So why would we continue investing in a piece of infrastructure to maybe Band-Aid for another 2 or 3 years? We've been told through the engineering that with the significant investment to date, we're looking at another 7 to 8 years. And I think part of that rationale should probably come in this background story as well, in terms of why that just isn't a safe, feasible option for us to continue to move forward with, and I continue to support what I think would be a really good opportunity for this community to provide comment on the future of its waterfront, and that the floating wharf, in my mind, does present what may be a very vibrant opportunity in keeping with some of what we've seen from previous visioning exercises in the community. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll just want to say finally that I just want to pass along, echoing the mayor's sentiments, thanking the members of council and staff, and especially the volunteers who we appointed to the committee for the work that they did, because it was a lot of work and it involved a lot of time and energy, and they did it on behalf of our community to make it a better place. So thank you. And to those who are watching and who will watch later, the engagement process is an extremely important and valuable tool in this process, and I would invite everybody. We are going to reach out in the various means we have at our disposal, but you as individuals have many friends in the community watching this, and just reach out to everybody you know and spread the word, and the more feedback we can get, the better this process will go along. So thank you very much. And seeing nothing else, so I'll move, we want to move adjournment. Oh, sorry. Oh, right, forgot all about that. So we'll call the question. All in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Now I'll move for adjournment.
So move.
Second.
All in favor? Carries unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
I know what it's like when you go ahead and make comments and then
Forget.